Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Hello. Now this is episode 489, which only leaves me 11 more episodes which come out weekly. So it's 11 weeks from now where I'm going to hit episode 500. And I'm not too sure what I'm going to do when I get to episode 500. I don't know whether or not to continue or to stop. I have been doing this podcast since 2016, and that's now 10 years since I started it. I'm sure I've covered quite a lot of things. I haven't covered what we're going to be covering today. I haven't covered it in any detail at all. I probably only mentioned it in passing, and that is because, as per usual, I don't talk about something until I understand it, and now I understand it, and I've looked into it a bit more. So if you've got any ideas and whether or not you think I should continue, or you've had enough for me or whatever, then do email me, mary@maryenglish.co.uk. Obviously, I will be continuing to do interviews, and we have got an interview coming up, which is very exciting. And our next guest is going to be Peter Stockinger, who's a traditional astrologer with over 35 years of experience, and he is an expert in predictive astrology, orrery, natal and election techniques, and he was born in Austria in 1964. So we're going to be speaking with him soon, so obviously stay tuned for that. Now this week, as I said last week, we're going to be covering a thing called a T-square. What is a T-square, Mary? Well, let me see if I can explain it to you. We've got 4 chart examples that we're going to use. I'm going to be quoting extensively from, can't do it too extensively because that breaks copyright, Planetary Aspects from Conflict to Cooperation by a lady called Tracy Marks. Now, I have a couple of her books, so a total of 3 books. The other 2 books of hers I've got is The Astrology of Self-Discovery, an in-depth exploration of the potentials revealed in your birth chart, emphasising Neptune, Pluto, the Moon and outer planet transits. And the first book of hers I bought was Your Secret Self, Illuminating the Mysteries of the 12th House, a guide to using astrology and your dreams for personal growth. Includes dream interpretation methods and guidelines, which was a jolly interesting book. So Tracy is one of the most popular and original writers in contemporary astrology, combining her training in psychotherapy with many years' experience in astrology to produce a unique approach to self-understanding. Ms. Marks holds a BA and MA degrees from Tufts University and has lectured throughout the USA and Canada. She's an award-winning author and has received a Carnegie Fund grant and published a number of books, including The Art of Chart Interpretation, Planetary Aspects, and The Astrology, which I just mentioned, of Self-Discovery. Currently, she practices psychotherapy and leads groups in dream work and journal writing in Arlington, Massachusetts. I don't know if she's still located there. As far as I can find, she doesn't have a website. She did have a Facebook page and it hasn't been updated since 2025. She was on Twitter, but she never posted, and she'd be 76 now, so I doubt very much that she's still working, but hey, I don't know. But anyway, that's Tracy Marks, and it's her book that we're going to be going through today. Now, I'd love to be able to show to you a relative of mine that has a fantastic T-square, but I don't have their permission, so I can't talk about it. But their whole chart, bar 2 planets, is a T-square. So a T-square is when you have 2 planets in opposition. So I'll start with a chart example. This is somebody who's already volunteered on the podcast, and her name's Claudia. So you've got 2 planets in opposition, and then 1 planet that makes a square to those 2 planets that are in opposition. So if you go over to the show notes where this first chart that I'm talking about is located, which is at AstroMary, romary.libsyn.com. You'll see the chart. We're using the chart. This is Claudia's chart. And she has her moon at 26 degrees Taurus. And in opposition to that, she has her Neptune at 22 degrees Scorpio. So those two planets are opposite each other. And then she has a conjunction of Jupiter and Venus in the sign of Leo. So these are all fixed signs, yeah? So in a T-square, you're going to have 3 signs that are united by a square and an opposition, and they're all in the same quality, or the other word for quality is modality. Now, it depends on when you look at it, whoever's chart you're looking at, depending on what else is going on there. Sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to see because you'll have lots of other red lines going on the place, and a T-square on astro.com, if you're just using their normal, so you're not got into anything technical, you're just using their normal chart pictures, they will have the oppositions and squares, the lines to and from them written in red. So you'll see this funny little triangle. So a T-square looks like a triangle. That's what you're looking for, a red triangle in the chart. So you're not looking for a red square or a red cross, because that's called a grand cross. You're looking for a triangle in red, and you need to make sure that 2 planets are directly opposite each other and one further planet is in the same modality and forms an exact square to those other opposing planets. Now, I've got one in my chart. I've got a lot in my chart because I've got a splash chart, and it's not quite a square. So the squares to the what's called the focal planet, it isn't mathematically that precise. So the chart examples I'm showing you today are pretty much precise. So Claudia has moon 26 degrees, Neptune 22 degrees, so there's only a few degrees of warp difference there. Jupiter, so if we just ignore Venus for a second, we say Jupiter is 25. Okay, we can add Venus as well, which is 27. Those are all numbers that are in the late 20s, or mid 20s, not late 20s. And so they're all forming an aspect to each other. So why is that a problem, Mary? Well, I don't know that I consider it a problem because I've got so many charts and squares in my chart anyway. The one thing that astrology allowed me to do when I was learning it was to understand the biggest one I understood first of all was that I've got sun and moon square, so I'm constantly working against my own best interests. So once I learned that, then life is a hell of a lot easier. So let's just read a little bit about, to start with, what Tracy tells us about a T-square. So this is on page 11, general meaning. A T-square is an imbalanced but dynamic configuration. The 2 squares, which both involve the focal planet, I'll talk about that in a minute, create frustration and tension which interfere with the natural constructive expression of the planet according to the sign and house in which it's positioned. This planet seems to be pulled in 2 directions by the opposition. Because the opposing planets in their signs and houses are unintegrated and out of balance, they're in conflict, and their conflict increases the pressure experienced at the focal point. The attempts of the focal planet to cope with its pressure, to regain its balance and to express itself freely usually results in a powerful release of energy, often expressed in a compulsive, wasteful or extreme manner, and a call to action. Now, in Claudia's case, her focal planet is the one where the opposition forms the squares to it. So her focal planets, plural, are Jupiter and Venus in the sign of Leo. They just so happen to be in her 3rd house. The 3rd house is the house of communication. Venus is all about love and affection. If you stick it next to Jupiter, you're going to get even more love and affection. Put it in your 3rd house, you're going to be communicating in a warm, affectionate way. However, because that also then forms a square to her Neptune in Scorpio in her 6th, that's about health, and then her moon in Taurus in the 12th, which is hidden and let's go and eat lots of chocolate, that type of thing. So just putting aside a square for a minute, when we've got an opposition in our chart, the two planets aren't having a particularly happy conversation. And what can happen when you have an opposition in your chart, you'll go to extremes. It's the same thing for people that have seesaw charts. They naturally go from one thing to the other thing. So they don't do the middle thing. They do the all this way or all that way, but the middle ground is very much not going to happen. When you've got a T-square, you have got now a square that goes to your opposition, and so the energy, and if you think about it going ping pong, ping pong, ping pong around your chart, it's the focal point or the focal planet, or whatever you want to call it. The square bit of it is where it gets expressed, because it goes ping pong on opposition, and then it goes square. And in her case, in Claudia's case, it's going to be the third house of communication. Does she feel heard and understood? Do other people understand her? Might she get a little bit OTT with how she expresses, that type of thing. Now, with anything that's square or opposition in your chart, there's millions of different ways. It's an exaggeration, Mary, but there's a number of different ways to be able to cope with them. We'll come on to that later on in the podcast. Remember, of course, that none of these podcasts are particularly long, so I can't go into anything in any great depth. So that's Claudia's chart. All of her T-square is in fixed signs. So what do you think a fixed sign is like? A fixed sign doesn't want to change. A fixed sign wants to carry on the same track in the road and never to leave it and deviate or make a sharp left or anything. A fixed sign always will go down the same groove and hates, trust me, I know so many fixed signs, doesn't want to change. Okay, they get totally freaked out if there's too much change too quickly without them suddenly sort of waking up and going, I've got to change things. Yes, which is what's happened to the sign of Taurus during the Uranus transit for the last 7 years. They've suddenly woken up one day and gone, I don't want to do this anymore, or circumstances outside them have instigated it. So in Claudia's case, her T-square is fixed. Now, in our next chart example, we have TE, born Wednesday, 27th of September 2000 at 4 p.m. in Atlanta, Georgia. Their T-square is all in mutable signs. So they've got Pluto, 10 degrees Sagittarius, in opposition, it's almost directly opposition, to Jupiter in the sign of Gemini in the 5th house. So Pluto's in the 11th and Jupiter is in the 5th. And they form a square to Mars, which is in the sign of Virgo, 6 degrees. So that's pretty much, very much within orb. That's a very strong T-square in TE's chart. So there'll always be, I was thinking squares is itches that, it doesn't feel quite right. I don't consider squares and oppositions to be bad. I think they're great motivators, especially if they can be used in a creative way. There's other expressions of it that can be a bit disastrous, but when you get your T-square and you get all your squares and you understand them, that could be your motivator to do things differently. Yeah? Now, in T's case, his T-square is in mutable signs. So what are mutable signs like? Lots and lots and lots of change. So with the T-square, the energies be going around from Pluto to Mars to Jupiter, want to learn more and more and more, and the Jupiter's in the 5th, so it's creativity, which is in opposition to the Pluto, which is in the 11th. The deep change of transformation on the friendship front might find it a bit difficult to join a group. Mars in the 8th, hiding away. This is where my energy comes from. I'm going to keep that all secret, not going to tell anybody, but it's all in mutable signs. What are mutable signs like? Change. Let's change this and let's change that. So that's the quality of TE's T-square. Okay. Now, in Tracy Marks's case, I've created her chart using astro.com, but because I've got her data from Astro Data Bank, the chart as it's been made up is a slightly different look to it than the ones that I get from my own personal account from the podcast volunteers. But anyway, her T-square is all in cardinal signs. So she's got Sun 3 degrees Libra. She's got Moon 9 degrees Aries. She's got a Sun Moon opposition. Sun is who we are, Moon is how we feel. They're in direct opposition. Nobody ever knows how they feel when their Sun and Moon are in opposition. They were born during a full moon. How do I feel? I don't know. And it forms a square. So the Sun and the Moon both form a square to Uranus, and Uranus is 9 degrees into the sign of Cancer, and all of her T-square, which when you look at her chart, so do buzz over to the show notes, you'll see the T-square much more clearly because it absolutely stands out when you're looking at it. You can see this funny little red triangle that's on its side. Yeah. And hers is all in cardinal signs. And what do cardinal signs want to do? They want to lead. They want to go ahead. They want to talk about tomorrow. They want to go what's going to happen later. They're not that concerned with what's happening now. They want to have a plan. They want to do their 10-year plan, 5-year plan, 5-month plan, whatever. They want to be able to plan ahead. Because this T-square takes into account Uranus in the 12th, that's quite tricky for long-term personal relationships. On the covers of the books, she's mentioned as Ms. Marks, so one assumes that she might not have married. That could be possibly, I don't know, never met the woman, it could be of the Uranus in Cancer in the 7th, not wanting to lose the freedom that is necessary, that will happen in a close personal relationship. But Uranus is quite an erratic planet to have in the 7th. I do not know. But the Moon is in the 4th. Moon's very happy there. And the Sun is in the 10th, wants to be quite career orientated. And she definitely has. She's clocked up a lot of books, 6 in total, and spent a long time lecturing and teaching in ancient crafts in local universities and colleges, etc. So a T-square is only ever going to contain 3 signs. And so what needs to be taken into account is the 4th sign that's missing, that's in the same modality or quality. So just staying at Tracy's chart for a moment. That sign of the zodiac is Capricorn, because we've covered Sun in Libra, Moon in Aries, Uranus in Cancer. She has nothing in the sign of Capricorn, and Capricorn takes up most of her first house. Now, the partially formed T-square that I've got in my chart, the bit that's missing in it is actually my MC, which is in the sign of Taurus. And I've been in the same job for about a millennia, so exaggeration, maybe 30 years. So I haven't changed the job that I do, which is talking to you and being an astrologer. So in Tracy's case, her empty bit is her first house in the sign of Capricorn, and this is what she says about the empty space. The empty space of the T-square, particularly if no planets occupy its sign and house, she hasn't got any, indicates a deficiency or hole in the personality. Usually, a T-square person feels helpless and insecure when attempting to use energies indicated by the sign, or when focusing upon the area of life indicated by the house of the empty space. With little understanding of this sign or house, he or she is stumped when trying to develop this quality or area of life. Frequently, interacting with people who have an emphasis of the sign or house in question can be an aid to understanding exactly what qualities are lacking and how they can be developed. The empty space of a T-square is similar in many ways to the lack of an element. In both cases, a person may be aware of a personal deficiency or of an imbalanced lifestyle and may overcompensate by striving too hard or too compulsively to express the energy and or area of life in question. The striving itself is desirable, but without a complete understanding of this deficiency and of how the missing sign, house or element can be cultivated, and without an attempt to develop this facet of being in an integrated or balanced manner, the person usually fails to overcome his inadequacy. Escaping from conflicts represented by the focal planet rather than trying actively to resolve them is especially likely to compound the problem. Now, in my case, as I mentioned, my MC is the missing part of my not quite so formed T-square. And interestingly, when I went into private practice as a homeopath, my supervisor is she's still alive and she still supports me as a supervisor. And she's a Taurus. So my MC, so being friends with her for a long time helped me understand the stability part of being self-employed that was important. So I actually don't run my practice in the same way that she ran hers. This is my homeopathic practice now. But because she encouraged me, she's exactly 10 years older than me, I felt very supported in my work, my MC being in Taurus, by just the fact that she was alive and communicating with me and supporting me, etc. So I saw how she did her things and I did things similar but not exactly the same, and tips and tricks and all the rest of it. So I felt very, very supported. I'm now married to a Taurus, and I doubt very much I'd even be able to talk to you if I wasn't, because again, that Taurus energy gives the stability within my life to be able to cope with and have that part of my chart that's empty. I have no planets in Taurus, but I'm married to a Taurus, and his sun sign near enough conjuncts to my MC. So once again, same sign as zodiac as my supervisor, I feel supported in my work. Now, Tracy gives a lot of examples in the book on how to fix things. That's why you've got to get it if you have this in your chart and you want to learn more about it. And I'm now on page 88, and she's talking about on a practical level. So on a practical level, this triangular relationship can be related directly to oppositions in the chart and to the T-square configuration as a whole. Consider the dissatisfaction of a woman with Taurus/Scorpio opposition who is a manager in a large company. Perhaps she has a T-square to Pluto in Leo in the 7th house, with Mars in Taurus in the 4th, opposing Mercury and Scorpio in the 10th. She wants to become trained as a psychologist, but doesn't want to sacrifice her material security, that's the Taurus bit, while procuring her degree. She can compromise by taking a cut in pay and working in the personnel department of the same company, or she can fulfill the needs of both her Taurus and Scorpio by attending inexpensive hometown university at nights rather than prestige university 100 miles away, while continuing in her present job. Her focal planet, Pluto, functioning in both the 7th house Leo and 1st house Aquarius, as she totally involves herself in her schooling, develops counselling skills and becomes friends with other psychology students, will give her the resourcefulness and energy she needs to finish her degree. Her focal planet is essentially the 3rd point of the triangle, the controlling and regulating principle. And she gives another example, and then she says, the focal planet is therefore a key to synthesizing a T-square. It can help you become aware of new alternatives which will enable you to fulfill both sides of your opposition. But you can also begin with your opposition and attempt to integrate it. The expansion of consciousness which occurs as you transcend the conflicting polarities can awaken you to new expressions of your focal planet and release energy which it can use to direct the ongoing synthesis of the opposition. Now, the book is very helpful because it gives you the signs of the zodiac, it gives you the planets, and it gives you the houses. And when it comes to the planets, she talks about the positive and the negative expressions of them. My partially existent T-square involves Neptune in the 3rd, opposition to the MC in the 9th. And my Neptune is retrograde in the sign of Scorpio in the 3rd. And oh, how fun is that? It's the planet of psychic connection, etc. And I do psychic readings, but I incorporate astrology with them as well. But I have done psychic readings for a hell of a long time. And I remember when I first started, I started reading when I was 18. How mad was that? And I didn't charge enough money, and I spent too long with the clients, and I just couldn't make a living. So I got myself a job in a chemist shop, working behind the counter. I think you call them pharmacies in other countries, but in the UK they're called chemists. Yeah, so I worked in a chemist shop. I had lots of shop jobs when I was younger, but I used to do readings on the side, and as I've mentioned before, I didn't get into doing any of this for a career until I was in my 30s, and that was because of my homeopathy. We won't go into the whole of my story because that's not what this podcast is about, but in reading the book and doing my best to understand it, to be able to relate it to yourselves, I obviously had to go through my own chart and see whether or not the things that she suggested or talks about are useful, and they certainly are. I absolutely recommend this book if you've got a T-square. So helpfully, she gives you the negative expressions of the planet and the positive expressions of the planet. So therefore, and she also tells you, how you can utilize the positive sides to it, but you need to recognize that you might have been expressing that focal planet, that opposition, whatever it is, in the negative way. Is far better, and this is what I try far better to do the positive expression of any planet. And this is something that I do my utmost to help clients with when they're in a consultation. If I can see, maybe they're expressing the negative part of this planet, let's talk about what could be the more positive way of expressing it without stressing oneself out. Now, going back to if you want to be able to identify whether or not you do have a T-square in your chart, there's another way of looking for it. So in the next chart example, we've got Jonathan Cainer, who was a pretty famous astrologer in the UK. He was such a kind bloke. When I wrote the Sagittarius book, I asked him to give me a review, which he did. So the quote from Jonathan Cainer is on the cover of the Sagittarius book, and it's mentioned inside as well. It was really kind of him because he was just so busy, it was mad. He was born on the 18th of December 1957 at 8 a.m. in London. He was a Sagittarius with a Saggy ascendant and moon in Scorpio. Now, if you look at the graph at the bottom right hand side, so don't look into the chart, you will see a funny looking square and it doesn't look quite right. What you do is you go down to the bottom right hand side, and if you look at the moon column, so you go moon and you're looking all the way down, you see moon is square to Uranus, because moon is in Scorpio, Uranus is in Leo. And then you go along, so you've got to the moon line and you're going along to the Uranus line. You'll also see that the square, but you get to Venus, there's an opposition. So moon, and then you get along to Venus, and Venus, so on the Uranus line, the moon is square to Uranus and Venus is opposition to Uranus. That's another way of double checking that within orbs and all the rest of it, that you've got a T-square going on, because unfortunately you can have a T-square that is out of sign, but mathematically, I'm not going to cover that today, we haven't got time, but mathematically forming a square in an opposition. So you could have things that are out of sign, so they're not all going to be the same quality. I ain't going to cover that today because it's a nightmare to be able to even synthesize it. But Jonathan Cainer's chart, it's all fixed. So he's got Venus opposition to Uranus. Venus is in the second house of money. Venus is well and truly happy there. He had a sort of a syndicate column that he wrote for, and other people helped him with it, and it was quite, I think he wrote every day. Can you imagine writing a column every day? Oh my God. Sometimes he employed other people to write it for him. Opposition to Uranus in Leo in the 8th, and then it incorporates his moon, which is in Scorpio in the 11th. He was pretty friendly, but obviously privacy was important for many, but moon in Scorpio is very, very important to have the privacy. And the moon's 19 degrees, so it's slightly out of orb, but it is still forming a square to Uranus, which is 11 degrees. But that's a T-square. When you look at his chart, it's because there's other things going on that looks a little bit busy. It's not quite easy, so easy to see. So look down at the graph that's on the bottom right hand side and look along one line. So you've got something is squaring to something else is opposition to something else. That's going to be a T-square, yeah? So always having diagnosed something in someone's chart. Now what do I do? So we're now in chapter, I don't know what chapter number this is, but we're on page 168, How to Handle Your T-Square, which was the original title of the, I'm sure that's the original title of the book, hold on. Yes, when she first wrote the book, which was 1979, it was called How to Handle Your T-Square. Then it got republished in 1987, and this is published by CRCS. They're an astrological publisher, which is called How to Handle Your T-Square, and this is techniques. So she says, the techniques provided in this chapter can help you understand your T-square, to become aware of alternate ways to express and channel its energies, and to experience these new alternatives, developing a centre to yourself so that you can translate your awareness into constructive action. These techniques are derived from 1. My experience interpreting astrology charts, 2. Study, training and practice and Gestalt therapy, transactional analysis, psychosynthesis and meditation. That's quite heavy stuff. I'm not so sure. Anyway, don't judge. 3. A lifetime of journal writing and several years' experience creating and teaching journal writing for personal growth. 4. 2 of my unpublished books, The Book of Possibilities, a workbook for discovering and actualising one's dreams, and Passing of Clouds, a collection of personal insights. I think those are still not published. But anyway, this chapter is arranged according to techniques which can loosely be classified as astrological, introspective, dialoguing, meditative, creative and practical. If you have an air element emphasis in your chart, a strong Mercury or Virgo planets, the astrological and introspective techniques, which are analytical in nature, may appeal to you. If you have a fire emphasis or prominent Sun, Mars, Moon, you may prefer the Gestalt/dialogue or creative approaches, which allow you to identify with the different parts of yourself, experience them directly rather than analysing them or detaching yourself from them. If you have a water emphasis or prominent Neptune, you may want to try meditative, intuitive techniques to disidentify with and transcend your emotional conflicts and to develop an inner centre which can coordinate all parts of your being. You may gravitate towards directed fantasy or creative techniques which exercise your imagination. If you have an earth element emphasis or a strong Saturn or Mercury, you may feel most comfortable with practical techniques through which you can develop concrete programs of action. Beyond these techniques, you may choose to explore some form of psychotherapy or personal/spiritual development, which seems appropriate to you because its approach harmonises with an emphasis in your chart or the energies of your focal planet. Or you may, in contrast, pursue a path which is more reflective of the planet sign or house of your empty space and which helps you to express these qualities. Now on page 169, which is the next page, she's got a little table which she says is purely subjective classification of therapies and related paths developing according to the planets which most expressive of their approaches and techniques. So she's got, which path for you, ? Action therapy if you've got Mars and Saturn involved. Art therapy if you've got Sun, Venus and Neptune, and so on. I'm not going to read them all because you need to buy the book. But she, one of them in there is like karate and rolfing and nutritional therapy, these types of things. So those are the therapies that you could, or the techniques that you could use to be able to quieten down and give comfort to that part of your inner self. Now, one of the techniques that she recommends is dialoguing between planets, and she gives an example. A woman with a T-square to Mars in Aries in the 5th house fluctuates dramatically between her 2nd house Capricorn Sun and her 8th house Cancer Moon. One year she drives herself relentlessly in order to succeed at sales work, avoiding any emotional entanglements and refusing financial help from her wealthy mother. The next year she quits her job, engages in numerous affairs and cultivates her relationship with her mother, from whom she now accepts lavish gifts. "I want to be self-sufficient," her Sun tells her Moon. "You're too dependent," her Moon responds. "Stop trying to deprive me. I want to be loved. And why should I work when Mother sends me money?" After conducting several Sun-Moon dialogues, this woman begins to realise that she can work and accept occasional help from her mother without becoming overly dependent, and that she can derive satisfaction from relationships without maintaining an all or nothing approach to love. So she recommends writing this down and imagining that you are those two planets. There's also a thing called astrodrama or psychodrama. There are people that you can go, groups that you can go to, where your chart is now the subject to conversation, and everybody stands in placements in a circle and represents the planets. Though I've never been to one, it's not something I particularly want to do. But the various people that are there, so there needs to be a minimum of 10 people, because one's going to represent every part of your chart, and they take on the character of that planet, and so there can be conversations between them. So one person's your moon and another person's your sun sign, and obviously the people got to understand quite a bit of astrology to do this, but it's sort of astro drama. And then you maybe work on one particular bit in your chart. Maybe your Mercury is in opposition to your Pluto, so you'll have two people dialoguing there, and so that you're not part of this, by the way, you're watching, you can see how those things are represented in your chart. How could you do them differently? And maybe the people that are acting these parts in your charts come up with different expressions of your planets, so that you can now feel at one with them. So have a look in your chart, see if you've got a T-square, see if it's causing any difficulties for you. Have you managed to resolve all the inverted commas issues that your T-square might represent for yourself? I will put a link in the show notes to the book. It's still available. It's been reprinted. There are copies. I've checked. There are on Amazon 14 copies of it at the moment. And I think it's available in both the US and the UK from Amazon. The book is, as I say, still being published, so it's definitely worth a read. So even if you don't have that in your chart, you can then assist any clients of yours that might have it, and it might or might not be an issue for the person that you're working with. But if they do have one and they ask about it, and this has been prompted by somebody who had one and asked me about it, so therefore I then had to go off and learn more about it. So hopefully they now feel understood. And you yourself, if you've got one, it might be helpful for yourself. I don't recommend going into this unless your astrology is particularly strong, because there's quite a lot of things that you've got to keep in mind. You've got to know your signs, your planets and your houses, because otherwise it's going to become a horrible blur for you. But the book is good and it will help you understand it. So today we've been talking about T-squares and Tracy Marks's book. We have a lovely guest next week called Peter, who's going to be talking about ancient astrology and one of his books, which is about crystals. It's all very exciting what they used to get up to. And if you've got any questions on astrology, you'd like to have your chart featured, or you've got any suggestions for what I should do with the podcast, do get in contact. It's Mary at maryenglish.co.uk, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye now.